Hello and welcome, fellow world builders, to another Inkarnate live stream. It's Wednesday, yeah! Today we're going to be starting the first installment in a castle series using the fantasy battle map style, and we're going to start with the castle precursor, which is going to be like the hill fort. Now, if you want to follow along in today's stream, please go ahead and direct your attention to my chat over to the chat, and you'll notice that I've provided the link so you can clone and edit the map to follow along. Now, I'm excited about this. I love castles. I love the various types of castles, so this will be really fun. And I'm just going to quickly review a little bit about the hill fort so you kind of have a general idea on what it's about. Hey, first-time chatter, Pi Kazar, welcome. Hey, awesome. So glad that you're here. I made a little guide here that kind of is going to take you through the various types of castles that we're going to be making in the series. You look to that far left, you'll see we got the hill forts. So some of the earliest defenses were deep trenches around hilltops. These trenches were difficult to climb and left attackers very much exposed to the defenders. So, hey, a little bit of, they didn't have necessarily stone masonry or knew to have specific tools to kind of create stone walls or even thick, sturdy palisade or wooden walls to defend themselves. So just digging away at the side of a hill to create a trench or a wall was a kind of a primitive but a easy way to kind of create the defenses. So the hill fort is going to be extremely useful for those of you who have campaigns with maybe an isolated village or some kind of primitive village, maybe even like a fey village that's hidden in the forest somewhere. So that's what that's going to be useful for. Or if you just want a semi-fortified or a semi-defendable kind of village on top of a hill. So all of those things work great for that. So let's go ahead and start with, of course, process. You got to have some kind of process when you are making your map. Otherwise, you're going to get lost. So first, always start with scale. Scale is the number one thing. You got to start with that first. So what you do is you run your mouse right over to the left side, open up, click that grid, click show grid, and I'm using the default 40 by 30. And that means that what I'm doing there is one of those single cells equals 5 square feet. Hey, first time chatter, gaming related. So glad that you are here and always glad to give the tutorials. So we're going to go with scale first. And like I said, in each individual cell within the grid equals 5 square feet. So, and if by 40 by 30, then it's going to be 200 feet by 150 feet. Hey, that's a decent size battle map, lots of room for your players to run around, and also knowing what each cell is, it's 5 square feet, will also help you determine how big will your stairwells be, how big will your walls be, so it's going to be helpful to also set your stamped scale because you've set the scale to 5.5 square, or not 5.5, sorry, 5 square feet. So set the scale in the beginning, okay? So that way you're not trying to resize everything to fit the scale now that you've set it halfway through the map. Hey, first time chatter, so glad you're here. Hey, semi-awesome Natic, 0, awesome. Okay, so now once you've set that scale, the next step in the process is to do some kind of layout. Or if you have some kind of image guide or some kind of reference image, I suggest you use that. So the way that I do my terrain before I start putting down stamps and using the add mode of the mask tool and all that stuff, I like to instead use the path tool to kind of create a little bit of a layout to kind of help me. And the first layout we're going to work on is the terrain, right? Now, when you're thinking about terrain, what you want to factor in is availability of water, right? Because this is going to be a hill fort or a village on top of a hill. So they're going to need access to water. So have a creek, river, have it next to the ocean, have a well somewhere. There needs to be some kind of accessibility to water. Hey, first time chatter, chaos of Cosmos. Glad that you are here. Just so you know, with that whole grid, you can go ahead and change the opacity right here. See where that bar comes up? You can see where my mouse comes up, and you can change this bar right here to change the opacity. Okay. Now, so I've got a river here. You notice I got this nice little blue kind of river right here, and that's going to work out great. 1 second here while I pull out. 1 second. Oh, I don't know where it went. Let me just get this layouts here. Let's go with So now that you've kind of put together all this, and I'll show you how to put together the stamps, I'll go through the whole process on how I put down stamps, textures, everything. So if you're wondering, don't worry, we'll get to all of that. Next, we're going to do the fort layout, which just means the structures that I'm going to have on it. So I was thinking just one kind of larger, you kind of see here, right here, let's see a larger, like a chieftain-like hut, and then maybe some smaller huts as well. And it's just a simple kind of hill fort, a village, primitive technology. So we're not going to worry about making any massive buildings, just small circular yurts, I think will work just fine here. And then after you've done that, of course, you're going to want to do access. And by access, I mean, how are your players or NPCs or whatever monsters that you're controlling as a DM, how do they get to the top of the fort? And so I use the path tool, that red dotted lines, and then it just kind of shows you the access so that you know how to get to the top. So we'll have one access here on the other side that kind of leads up into the hill fort, and then another access on this point where the water is going up this way. So access is super important because you need to know how players are going to know how to get up and down, and it'll be helpful for you in your VTT so that you know what spaces are going to be walls and whatnot. So it's important to kind of make sure that you know where the access is, how your players are going to be able to maneuver around the map. Now that I have that set up, I'll go ahead and turn off the grid real quick. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the mask tool to kind of create some stuff. Now, normally when you open up a map, the first layer you see, the default is going to just be the BG layer, okay? And what I like to do is that if you have a map where the majority of the map is on land, then go to that mask tool and hit the add and then click fill all, okay? Once it's all filled in, then it will all be land. Okay, it'll be filled with what's called FG. That's pretty much anything that's made with the add mode of the mask tool, basically. Okay, so I'll go ahead and turn that on too. All right, now once you've filled the whole thing, you'll want to take the subtract mode of the mask tool with a circular brush and follow that guide like this over. I'll just give you a quick example so you can see, remove some land right here. See, so you can see that the land is made with the FG, the add mode of the mask tool, the BG layer, which is the water, okay? And it's nice to have the two layers separate, two paintable separate layers so that you don't accidentally paint some of your water textures onto your land textures. That's why there's two paintable layers. Very helpful. You can use it for a lot of things, but that's going to be the base gist of it. FG, land, BG, water, okay? Not complex. So the layout's already out. So let's go ahead and just take the layout and I'll go ahead and bring it down, because we're going to get to that next section, which is going to be terrain. And the way that I make terrain is pretty simple. I start with the largest terrain elements first. If you start from big to small, it's easier and you'll cover more space of the map with the work that you're doing. So it looks like the map is kind of moving more quickly. So if you start with larger first and then move your way down to smaller stamps, it works out really well. So let's go open up terrain. I'm going to start first with what is the most important thing here. It's going to be the hill, right? This is a hill fort. So let's go ahead and start with the first one. Let's go ahead and open this up real quick. And what I like to do first is I start with one large one, the base. Think of it as building upward on the terrain. You're building upward. So take your hills or cliff stamp, whatever stamp you want to use to represent hill, and you'll end up piecing them together, one piece at a time, going around. Now we are working on a Path Tool 2.0, what was previously called the Room Tool, but the Path Tool 2.0, and that will cover all of this, so you won't have to do any more of this wall or cliff Tetris. So I'm excited about that, but for now, you'll have to do it this way. You piece in individual cliff or whatever hill stamp that it might be, and then you can, once you've pieced it together, you can copy and paste that and just make it a little bit smaller. So that way you have, and then you can rearrange some stamps. I just took the exact same one, I rotated it just a hair, and then zoomed it down in size, and then fit it on top. That's your next layer going up. And then do the same thing again, copy, paste, and then move some of the stamps. So it's kind of building upward, okay? Don't start with something high up first. Start with the ground and build up, just like you would building a house or whatever you're constructing. You build from the ground up. So now that that main terrain, the biggest terrain feature is done, I can go on to the next step, which is I want to do some stuff with the water, okay? And what I've done is just kind of create a simple waterfall just to kind of show direction of the water. So what people struggle with a lot with water is that they don't put any kind of action, meaning showing the flow of the water, something floating in the water, things like that. So throwing in a small waterfall is a really nice element to kind of create, to put on it, to kind of show the direction or the flow of the water. It's also useful in a battle map if maybe a player jumps into the water and it kind of drifts them down a little bit. It's nice to know the direction of the water and the way that it's flowing, so it looks nice. And if you're wondering how to make waterfalls, we have an entire video on YouTube covering waterfalls, so I'm not going to explain it in depth here, but it's basically pretty simple stuff. You're just going to piece together your waterfall pieces. I drop the contrast all the way to 0, and then I bring the brightness all the way up to 100, and it removes the black line work in there, so it just shows white. And then once you've gone across, you've made that little shelf where that cliff is. Next, you'll go ahead and just take some rocks and just put them on either side. Put them on either side of the waterfall, so that way it kind of denotes that there's a little bit of a fall. So there's some rocks right there. So make sure you add that. If you want more detail on how to make a waterfall, again, go check out YouTube. We've got all that stuff. Once I've done that waterfall, I can start throwing in the next larger elements like trees and stuff like that. So I'll throw in trees, and we just released these really kind of cool new trees forest kind of mini pack. So the trees look a little bit more realistic and they look a little bit nicer. They're really nice stamps. So I threw those down, and I also made sure to do something, if you notice carefully here, is I tried to overlap. Notice how the tree is overlapping the river a little bit. Overlap creates the illusion of depth. So if you want to create more height or depth or dimension in your map, overlap stamps. That will be very, very helpful to you. So I placed a couple trees around, and I just put them on this side because on the other side I want players to be able to maneuver around, walk around. So then after adding the trees, I'll throw in stumps, and this is going to be kind of where the occupants or the inhabitants of this town or small hill fort cut down some trees and built their circular yurts. So it's nice to have there, and it's also a fun element for your players to interact with. They can jump on top of a stump, thrust down for an attack. They can trip somebody over the stump, and then you can go down for a death blow. Having some environment for your players to interact with is super nice. Don't just have flat ground where players just move around like chess pieces. Add some dimension. So that way, when you're portraying what happens in a battle and you're saying to your player, you jump onto the trunk or the trunk or the stump, and you thrust down and attack, doing extra damage. So throwing in some kind of stuff on the ground, whether it's stumps, a log, a bush, whatever it is, something that players can interact with. Super important. We're going to also throw in bushes. Whenever I throw in trees, I'd like to have some bushes too. A variety in vegetation creates a sense of more a reality and diversity, as you would expect to find in kind of a biome. So, and you make sure that your trees are a layer above the bush, because it would be really weird if there was a bush that was on top of a tree. So you make sure the trees are a layer above all of your bushes and your ground coverings, whatever it might be, ferns, flowers, bushes, whatever. So it's always important to do that. We're also going to decorate some more of the hillside as well. I'm going to throw in some vines to kind of create this vegetation, because it's nice to have some growth, and it kind of makes it look a little bit nicer, throwing in a little bit of vegetation on the hill. And then finally, I'll throw in some rocks. If you look at the edge of my hill right here, you'll kind of notice that there's not much transition between the hill and the kind of flat ground around it. right? So the way to kind of fix that problem is to show some debris, like maybe the hill is falling apart, there's some rocks. So go ahead and take some rocks and just place them around at pretty much at the base. And that's going to create this nice transition, and you would kind of expect some erosion to take place. If it rains, some of the side of the hill that's been dug out is going to collapse a little bit. So expect some kind of erosion. It's a great way to also kind of make it look a little more realistic, right? Now that we've done all the terrain, we can kind of go on to that next step, which is making the fort. And I'll go ahead and turn off the layout stuff. At least I can turn off the fort. Turn off this other line work, and we'll keep the fort stuff on. One moment, here we go. I want to keep the red circles there because I'm going to use those as a guide to determine where I'm going to be putting my huts. Okay, let's go check next on the list. Once you've kind of finished your terrain, you can start continuing the rest of the stamp process, which is kind of building the centerpiece, which is going to be that fort. So we'll put down some huts and stuff. So let's open up that fort. Now, when you're kind of working on a centerpiece or the main focal point of a map, you start with the largest things first. Just like I started with the largest stamps for terrain, you do the exact same thing when you're putting together the focal point, which is that village. And you'll start with the roofs first. Now, if you're not confident with your roofing game, that's okay. Don't worry. We have an entire stream dedicated to how to assemble roofs. I'll make sure to go ahead and plug that into the YouTube so that when you rewatch this, you'll be able to see how to do that. It's a really short video, and it's really easy to put roofs together once you kind of understand the basics. We're also going to show access, and by access, I just mean there's going to be sections of the hill where players are going to be able to more easily access the different tiers within the hills, or the different kind of tiers of the hills, by just walking on these 3 or 4 boards that have been laid down, and you'll just go up those to get to each tier. Okay, and all I did was just drop the opacity, I took each one of these kind of wooden walls, and then I went ahead and just dropped the saturation, and then made the darkest one at the bottom, and then from a gradient from darkest to lightest. So you'll notice carefully, to show some depth, that log at the bottom is darker, and then that middle one is just slightly lighter, and then the one at the top is the lightest. So it kind of creates this illusion of depth going down. That's one of the big secrets about depth, is contrast, dark and light. Things farther away, darker. Things closer to you, lighter. Great way to kind of portray depth outside of the other option, which is layering, okay? All right, so now that we've kind of added that, the last thing I like to do is add in some details to it. And there's a lot of things that you can add for details, but let's just go ahead and turn them all on for now. And we're going with some basic stuff. You've got a nice small little fire pit in the center of the village where people kind of keep warm, where they communally sit together to cook food. And you've got some very simple baskets, some sticks here for the fire over here, and then some more baskets, more sticks. So nothing complex. The objective for this one is I want to show that this society or this group or this village doesn't have hasn't really discovered stone masonry, the proper tools. So it's kind of primitive in kind of their technology. Again, does great for maybe a hidden village somewhere that's been isolated from everything. Now that I've got that all down, I'm going to go ahead and just turn off all my layouts. I don't need those anymore. And so you got the general idea there. And then also I'll show you how to do interiors, because I know some people are like, well, how do I make the interior for this? And this one's not complex. What's really nice is that it's just a circular building, so you don't have to do all these crazy angles. And you'll notice that all I did was just take 2 of these wooden stamps right here. This is actually 2 pieces. One piece, then I copied and rotated it, and then put them together. And then I took a clipping mask. Let's open this up. I put a clipping mask right here, and that clipping mask is going to be really helpful because it's going to hide pretty much any stamp that's underneath it. Think of it as a movable FG layer, and you can paint on it, okay? And the reason why I've put that on there is because this way you can move it to anywhere you want on the map. Let's say that you want to create a little section on the left or right side, paint it black, and then you want to have some of the interiors over here, okay? It's up to you how you want to go about doing interiors, but that's probably the best way, especially if you're using VTT. Once you've kind of put the walls together, oopsie, let's undo that real quick. Once you've kind of put everything together, I also like to make sure to put it, when I'm assembling it, I like to put it right over the building so that way I kind of get the dimensions properly. And then I put a little fire inside of it. I used this little roof, kind of this little hay roofing right here, and a little hay bale to kind of show a primitive bed, and then maybe some simple stone tool in there. So you can decorate it with whichever way you want, and of course you can paint that interior any way that you want. Maybe you want to throw in some kind of weird brown ground like this, or if you want to make it wood, or if you want to make it dirt, it's your choice how you want to go about it. It's up to you. Personally, I think dirt just works just fine. So that's how you put together interiors, at least for this one. Thankfully, they're circular, so they're kind of easy to put together. Okay, let's keep going. Let's go ahead and touch base on the next step in the process. Once you've kind of done all that, then you can move on to texturing. And I'm going to show you my step-by-step process, how I do my texturing. And it's not complex. It's pretty easy. It's just that it seems overwhelming because people don't know where to start. The first thing you need to do is select the textures that you want to basically represent your base FG and BG textures. So basically, I'm using my basic grass for the FG. So I'm covering the entire FG layer with this grass and the entire BG layer with that water. Once you've got the base texture down, that's step one. Step two, start blending together the stamps with the textures beneath it, which is that base texture. So step one, base textures. Select the ones that you want, and it doesn't have to be one texture each. You could have a mix between grass and dirt be your base textures for your FG, and have various types of water textures to be your BG. But for a good start with one for the FG, one for BG, and then you're going to paint on top of that. Step two, like I was saying, you're going to do those hill. We're going to do the stamps that are going to be blending things in. And so for the hill, I've used a mix between the dirt that has some of those kind of water or darker brown patches, and then the other dirt that doesn't have that. And what I like to do is take a soft brush, open up your brush, pick your size, and drop the opacity down to around 30 or so, okay? And then just start, and you can start by just going over the whole clip, the whole hill first, multiple strokes, and then continue kind of making it different, adding more and more strokes as you get closer to the top. And then you can mix between the dirt with the darker brown and that other dirt, because that's what you're going to do with your hill stamp. And you'll want to do the same thing with, if you have some stumps, put some dirt underneath it if you want to, or if you have some trees, put some grass underneath it. That's all what blending your stamps in with your base textures. Once you've kind of done those kind of texturing, you can start moving on to what's called alpha textures. If you're not familiar with what an alpha texture is, it just means that it supports transparency. That's really all that it really means. So if you're like, well, wait a minute, why is it called an alpha? It supports transparency. And these are the kind of textures that are absolutely perfect for blending other textures. Okay, so what I've done is to show that there's some action in the water. You notice that by my waterfall down here, you'll kind of notice that I've got this nice white, rapid looking feel to it. I've used this snow texture right here and then just placed it at the top, at the bottom of the waterfall to kind of create this nice kind of white water, rapid like feel to it. The other thing which is really nice is wherever you have some grass or a tree, you can use this moss right here. Works great for a nice, dark, rich, grassy patch. So you can put that. You'll notice that I've put some here. I've put some all along here. And you'll notice that I've got some over here as well. And on the side over here of this hill. So very, very helpful if you want to create more transition between grass and dirt, because the grass doesn't have any kind of alpha. So using this is a great way to transition between whatever other texture you're going, grass against dirt, against sand, whatever, okay? So alpha textures, absolute must, totally recommend it. And I've used a couple other alpha textures as well to kind of help blend. One of the ones I love using, and you all who go here know about it, is that cracked ground. It looks fantastic along the hills and the cliffs because it creates this extra kind of crack, a little bit of cracks here, and it creates a little bit more like erosion, and it works well against the line work on the cliffs or the hills or whatever stamp you're using. So cracked ground is another one. It's great for, again, putting it along cliffs or hills, up to you. Also, dry grass is a great alpha texture that I like to use, and I used it to kind of represent the road. You notice there's a little bit of a road right here. That's a great transition. You can use it to put it on top of dirt, and it will transition between dirt, snow, dirt, grass, whatever you want. That dry grass is perfect for that kind of transition. And the last one that I kind of put together was I used this rock texture, and I made sure that there was some transition between these rocks that I'm using right here to kind of show an edge. And then you'll notice that there's some of that small rock texture on the ground as well. It's just to create a transition between those rock stamps and that yellow texture that I'm using. So there's some kind of transition between stamp and texture. All right, really, really helpful. That's how you do blending properly, is by getting some kind of transition instead of boom, rocks and then just sand, rocks, some rock texture, and then the sand. So always remember that if you want some more realism or you want extra blending tricks, alphas are the way to go, okay? Again, they support transparency, super important. So texturing is not as complex as it looks. It's just a 3-step process: base texture, blending the stamps, and then using alpha textures to do the last bit of blending between the different types of textures and stamps, okay? Once we've kind of gone through all that texturing, then we can move on to light and shadow. You need to choose a direction in which the light is going. Most of the time, for a lot of you, the easiest thing to do is just to have your object shadow set to 0 X and Y offset, so that way it's always looking like it's just noon, where there's no projection of shadow that's going to be in a particular direction. But if you wanted some kind of directional shadow, you'd have to determine where the light source is first. So I want to determine that the light source is right here. And you've already can see some of that in the way that my hut's object shadows are. I've moved the X and Y offsets so that the shadow is moving a little bit to the bottom right. Okay? So now I need to make sure that all the shadows of my other stamps are in continuity with that. So whichever stamps I place down, those shadows should have the same X and Y offset dimensions, the same thing with your other stamps. So notice that the trees down here also have a hard shadow that projects away from the light source, okay? Now, what about more complex shadowing? Because sometimes you're showing more than just using an object shadow. You want to show that this hill, which is the dark side of the hill. The trick is the path tool. The path tool is super important. Let's first set where our lighting is. So I'll throw in some light sources. And what I've done is I put a light source right where that yellow path is up there. So that light source is going down. And then I've also put a light source on top of the very top of the hill because it's most exposed to the sun. So have the peak of the hill, have a light source on top of it. Just drop the opacity a little bit so it's not too yellowish. So just drop the opacity a little bit. Then you'll start using the shadows. And the shadow bits is a little bit more work. The shadow work is taking the path tool, and I'll show you how I go about doing this. It's a more advanced shadow technique, but it pays off. And that is that you want to just first go to the path tool, set the color to black, And what I like to do is I like to put down a path first so I can see it being edited live. So I blur it. We're going to bring the radius up. And let's also take the object shadow, and let's bring the shadow blur all the way up and the intensity all the way up. Perfect. Now I can keep blurring it so that I can remove that thick, dark line that you see. Let's remove that thick, dark line. I might have to drop the opacity a bit, which is fine. There we go, that works just fine. Now that you've set that, you can now take your path and you can just go over the areas where you want that shadow to be. Make sure you're careful about what layer your path is set to. It would look weird if you had a shadow going over something that wasn't supposed to have a shadow over it, but you can just paint a shadow using the path tool like this. And once we do get that room tool, you'll be able to make shadows as well. But we'll show you how it is here. So I'll go ahead, let's say I want to show some shadows along this stump right here. I can do that. Right? Or mostly you're going to be putting it along your cliffs. So you're adding, let's say the shadow was up, the sun was on the other side, then you would kind of paint in with your path like this. Now it's a little laggy on my side because I'm streaming, but for you at home, you probably won't have that problem. But you'll have to adjust the opacity a little bit once you've set it, just to kind of get the right kind of opacity that you're looking for. But it's a really nice and easy way. It doesn't require a pen. You can totally use a mouse to do all this. It's not complex, okay? So putting together light sources is not difficult. Step one, choose where the light source is. Two, you're going to have shadows projecting away from that light source unless it's topped straight, noon, sun going down. Your shadows can just be ambient occlusion, which is just that black shadow that goes around an object but doesn't move on the X and Y offsets. So it's actually pretty easy to put together. Okay, let's go on that next step. After you finish light and shadow, you're going to want to move on to filters. And I totally recommend filters. They're extremely helpful. They can allow for stamps to kind of blend in better. I'm going to use two ones here specifically. I'm going to use Red Sky and Clarity. Let me turn them off real quick and you can kind of see how it looks. Throw on one Clarity just to give it a little bit more pop. Okay, if you have a little bit more vibrant colors, more people will be attracted. So the bright colors are nice, unless it's meant to be some, somber, melancholic, gothic, Curse of Strahd type of map, then I totally understand it doesn't have to be bright, obviously. And then I'm going to throw in a Red Sky as well to kind of give a reddish tint to the overall map, and it kind of looks nice as well. I think it goes well with the browns and the greens that are there. So it looks nice, and you can throw on other filters if you want. You could throw in vignette if you wanted to. You could throw down some kind of texture stamp or texture filter that will kind of add more artifacts to the ground if you don't feel satisfied with how much is happening on your ground. So if you go into the filter tool, and you're going to click a new filter, and you're going to click inside. And now if you're wondering, well, wait, where are all the filters? There's more. Click Inkarnate, tab. And what this will do will open up all the filters. And you want to pick maybe grain, or you want to pick this old paper right here. It's a nice one. And you'll have to change the blend mode to overlay, and then change it to repeat. And we'll change the size a bit. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it off so you can kind of see how much of a difference that it makes. Let's go up here to this white right here. You can see just how bright this is right here. Watch what happens when I turn on that texture. You'll notice that it kind of adds some more artifacts. And you can bring it down layers. Let's say that you have a light source on layer 5. You don't want it to be affected by that. You can change layers. So let's bring this maybe to layer 4 instead. Let's bring up the opacity to give it a little bit more darker elements to it. And it kind of adds a little bit more grit to it. Now, if you don't like that yourself, that's okay. But I personally like old paper. It adds a little bit of grit to the map. It makes it look nice. Why texture more artifacts onto your map, or textures with a lot of artifacts, when you can just use a filter to do it instead? So definitely work smarter, not harder. Use filters to help you to make the map kind of pop out more, instead of adding an extra hour of texturing and planning out So that's kind of important. Well, hey, that's it for hilltop forts. We've got the next one that's going to be coming up probably next month is we're going to be making Roman forts. We're going to be having we'll talk a little bit about the history, maybe a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about how to make those Roman forts. Maybe you got a campaign where you have a Roman-esque or Roman type of civilization and you want to have a fort, or you just like the look of Roman forts and you want them incorporated into your campaign. Boom, we're going to be doing that. I love Roman forts. They're cool and they're great for any kind of battle, really. So we'll go ahead and cover that. So I'm excited for that. That is it. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm glad I was able to keep it short. I hope this was helpful. This will be added to YouTube tomorrow at 9 a.m. PST, or if you're on the East Coast, it's going to be pretty much at noon. So thank you, everyone, for joining me. Really appreciate it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you all next week when we do the top 10 battle map fails. So I'm excited for that. Hey, first time chatter, by the way, Ethano. Love y'all. Stay safe and healthy, okay?